The Manitoba Moose have invested far too much into this past offseason to look like they have just 3 games into the season.
Your Locked On Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day, every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, we have a little bit to chat about. Obviously, Winnipeg is not playing, this evening. They'll be playing tomorrow night against the Nashville Predators back home before they take on the Flames after that. But in between, obviously, the Manitoba Moose are getting their season underway. And just 3 games into the season, the Moose might really have some issues ahead. This was supposed to be one of the best teams in the AHL. And after, both Laval and Grand Rapids have kind of humbled the baby Jets a bit, it might be time to ask why. Is it just an early season thing? Are the kids maybe getting a little overwhelmed? What's happened in these first few games? And is it a longer trend from last season, right? We'll chat about that, preview tomorrow's game for the Jets against the Preds, and also talk a little bit about the week ahead for Winnipeg. Obviously, we are well into the heart of the season, and for the Jets, kind of well into the heart of their injury timeline. So, Winnipeg is already 3-1. That's a pretty nice banked record to have, especially considering the circumstances. We'll look ahead to who their next opponents are and, how many points the Jets might be getting out of that. But before we dive into all the fun stuff tonight, I did want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Now, like I said, the Jets are going in with a big investment to this Moose squad this year, right? Winnipeg really spent a lot of time and effort overhauling this Moose roster. And like the Moose have tons of talent to work with. You've got Barlow, Lambert, you'll have Anderson Dolan, Fagemo, tons of really good AHL veterans, plus a bunch of newcomers who are younger, lots of skill. You have one of the deepest back ends in the AHL, and yet through the first few games, the Moose have just about been outplayed in almost every game that they've had. Even the one that they won, they were not particularly good. Manitoba has been outchanced. They've been outskated, and I think tonight's game against Grand Rapids really showed some concerning trends. At a very basic level, I'm starting to feel like the Moose are just being completely outcoached. And it comes down to a couple of things, right? So the first issue that I noticed with the lineups coming into this game, there seems to be this trend of like the first 2 lines being very vet heavy and the bottom 2 lines being the so-called kid lines. And I don't really understand why you would do this. An age thing is perhaps a little old school in a lot of ways. You have to actually think about the forechecking and skill balance, though, right? For instance, David Gustafsson is on your 4th line, and I don't, for the life of me, understand why. Gustafsson already has 3 points into the season, including tonight's game. He's very clearly not a 4th-line player, and, just a few seasons ago was actually in the Moose top 6 and on their top line. Why would he be playing in a 4th-line role now when he's both offensively creative and a very strong forechecking and two-way presence? Like, that just really doesn't make any sense. It also doesn't really make sense to put all the kids together because, if you need some forechecking ability, some brawn, some veteran experience and leadership, help the kids out, especially if they're maybe dealing a little bit with some overly physical opponents. And Grand Rapids, I think, today displayed a simplicity to their game that belied some very good skill and just sort of overwhelmed whatever lack of structure the Moose came into the game with. When you had offensive zone possessions, I thought Manitoba looked very lost at times. you'd see a couple of good rushes and some really good counters here and there. But then when you had maybe, like a late puck carrier crossing into the zone and kind of coming up from the back end, trying to create a cycle game, doing any of the setup play, usually they would skate right into Grand Rapids' trap and then turn the puck over. Grand Rapids would spring a counter the other way. And the Moose just really created very little offense out of this. It was kind of weird to watch because you have a ton of skill and individual talent on this Manitoba squad, and yet they all played like the Flyers did the other night. It was really poor. And just given how much the Jets have tried to overhaul this team, I don't think it's just a situation of, a young team coming into the season with the first few games. It doesn't have that sense because I know some of these players from previous years, and they did not play this poorly. Brad Lambert, for instance, came into his first pro season, had 50 plus points. Last year looked completely different, shooting like 7% on the season, 30 points maybe. It was just not the sort of season, especially a follow-up year, that you'd expect from a very young budding talent. And to see what he's been doing so far already, he looks lost out there. And it's not just him. Billy Heinola was trying to make passes in plays, and there were guys that weren't even in position. You had outlets that were just straight up missing. There was one sequence where Heinola was passing towards Walker Dewar, who was standing by the bench. I don't know if he was supposed to get off for a line change, but it just seemed like there was zero communication, and no one really seemed to know what was going on. Grand Rapids then sprang an odd man rush off of the loose puck just sitting there by the boards, and it turned into a goal against. And like Heinola is a very smart player. This is not a guy who usually makes this number of mistakes in a game, let alone, at this level of hockey. And so it just, to me, it looks like there's something else going on. And it's why it feels like the coaching staff really isn't preparing this team all that well. The neutral zone play was very messy. The power play was just straight up ugly tonight. I know that they did have a scoring opportunity, but they also gave up a shorty, and it was a really ugly one where there were some guys waiting along Grand Rapids blue line, and like the puck carrier came through the neutral zone, immediately hit a wall of Griffins. There was an immediate turnover, and Grand Rapids sprang the other way, had an inside step, and Heinola couldn't get back in time to take away the puck from the goal scorer. So it's just like, this is not really how this team should be looking, even just a few games into the season. I know it's early in the year, and obviously there's a lot of adjustments, a lot of changes, but I feel like this is stuff that sort of kind of tracks with last year's Moose team. So it's not just a talent issue. It feels like the way that they're being coached, there's not very much coordination, communication. It felt like guys didn't know their assignments. I saw numerous instances where, the Moose would either be changing or, they just sort of froze in place. And like Grand Rapids would be immediately springing into space and on the opportunity. And it just seemed like Manitoba was nowhere to be found. So it definitely doesn't feel like it's so much the execution as it is whatever they're being told, whatever the structure of this game plan is, it's simply not good enough. So we'll have to wait and see if it turns around. But 3 games into the season, I'm already a little concerned about how they're being coached. I don't, always have this happen watching Jets hockey. The past couple of years, I may have some lineup quibbles and stuff, but for the most part, the structure of the game is very sound. That's not what I got from the Moose game. I felt like it was loose, very sloppy, and I was not happy with the performance at all. So we'll have to wait and see if, the Jets maybe need to think about making a change here. Obviously, again, it is 3 games into the season, but given how much time and money went into this offseason for this Moose team, the early results and returns are simply not good enough. So we'll see if it can turn around, but if not, it might be time for Winnipeg to make an aggressive change. Curious to know what you feel about this, though, if you've watched the Moose at all. Does this sort of ring true with what you've seen? Drop your thoughts and comments below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Turning our attention back to Winnipeg, wanted to chat about their game against the Preds and what to expect coming right up. Hockey season is officially here, and nothing beats being in the arena for those opening games. But let's be real, getting tickets can be a total headache. Between waiting in queues, surprise fees, and prices that jump right before checkout, it's easy to get frustrated when all you want to do is cheer on your team. That's where Gametime comes in, the app that gives fans the advantage. It's your ultimate life hack for scoring amazing NHL tickets fast, easy, and stress-free. I've used Gametime to buy Ravens playoff tickets. I got a seat view panoramic one at that, which is great. I had all of my prices up front, no hidden fees, no surprise charges, and Gametime actually helped me find one of the best deals for a great value seat amongst all of the ones that were available for the game. Gametime can help you get to Canada Life Center even faster, and you might even find some NHL tickets for as little as $25 or less. So take the guesswork out of buying NHL tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Get Gametime today. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us in tonight's episode as we're chatting a little bit about Winnipeg versus Nashville. Obviously, the Jets are now back home for at least a game before they head out for a couple more road opportunities next week, mixed in with some home games. Should be a little bit of a back and forth schedule, but for the Jets, they've now had a 3-1 start to the season. I think a lot of what we've seen early on for the Jets really hasn't been surprising. Defensively, pretty loose. And offensively, I think they've been very opportunistic is how I describe it. They've had some contributions from the bottom six. The Taves line, whoever has been on that unit, they haven't quite had things going every game. I think last game was the first time the Taves line was legit underwater. Usually they've been at least break even. This time they were actually swimming. So not normally something you'd be too worried about, but we'll keep an eye on it and see if it continues to be maybe a little bit of a trend. Maybe the Jets need to rethink about that line composition. Obviously, they brought in Pearson up from the fourth line last game. I don't know if they're going to stick with that or if they're going to maybe put Pearson back on the fourth and bring Chibrikov back in after giving Ford a fourth line game. I thought Ford looked pretty impressive on the fourth line, so I'm curious to know how they handle this. Pearson in a fourth line role has been good to start the year. I just wouldn't ask him to do a lot more than that. Otherwise, nothing else really seems to be super surprising. We'll see how practice looks. Obviously, the Jets have had some guys who have kind of been in and out due to some injuries. Hayden Fleury came back in the last game, and unlike the first couple games he was playing, they actually kept him with Schenn this time, and I would say that probably was a better opportunity. Now, I did have one commentator, Vader, mentioning, about the rotation stuff in a couple of different episodes, right? And I talked about the rotation last game. So I think, in the case of the defense, right, in particular, where we might say there's rotation happening for the Jets forwards to try and figure out what they are, I don't really think that necessarily applies with why the Jets have gone with the defense that they have. Dressing Schenn, Stanley, and Fleury is more to me a preference thing. I just don't think the team really likes Colin Miller, and that's been a trend for the past couple of years. If it was just a new thing, I wouldn't really consider this to be an anti-rotational situation, but I really do think the Jets have a clear preference about what they're looking for, and I think Miller's not big enough and not physical enough. And the other thing is that when Miller makes a mistake, it tends to be very visible because usually it's causing some sort of glaring odd man rush. When you have Fleury, Stanley, or Schenn struggling, it's usually like these micro turnovers, missed assignments, small stuff near the goal mouth where, you think to yourself, well, if I can get him on another shift where I'm asking him to position here or maybe man mark this way, we can kind of work that out. So it's like smaller stuff. Whereas with, a Miller type, he's like slapping the puck as hard as he can straight into a defender. It springs a counter the other way. And you're like, oh, Lord, what is he thinking, right? And like, even I'm sitting here kind of advocating for this guy. And sometimes even some of the, mistakes and decisions he's made, I'm kind of like, yeah, let's not do that again, Colin. And like, he knows better, he's a veteran savvy player. So with the Jets, I don't really think that there's anything to particularly find out with their defense. We kind of know what it is. The forwards, a little less so, right? Chibrikov, we're trying to figure out where he really fits in things. Is he a middle six guy? Does he have top six upside? Or is he more of a bottom six kind of player? So far, I think we've kind of tried to figure that part out a little bit. And I lean right now still to middle six. I think that's the ideal scenario for him. But maybe he's got more to his transition game than it initially appeared. So, hey, that's pretty happy. Good news. Parker Ford looks like a solid bottom six guy. I think that's where the mystery is, though. I'm not so sure. I don't have any sort of game feel for the blue line. We've already seen a lot of these guys in previous seasons, so it's not like there's a ton of unknowns there. As far as what we're going to see against the Preds, Nashville really hasn't been creating very much offense. And, even in these games that have been close score lines, they've not been particularly good. So looking at this team, as of earlier today, their current lines are Forsberg, O'Reilly, and Stamkos, then Jost, Svechkov, and Evangelista. You've got Bunting, Howla, and Marchessault on the third, and then Smith, McCarron, and Weisblatt on the fourth. On defense, they've got Wilsby and Josie as your first, Shea and Burbix as your second, and Stastny and Barron as your third pairing. Immediately, I think you kind of notice something funky, right? So this year, the Preds started out with Owen Martin on their first line. That very quickly got changed. And, this is a more vet-heavy look than we saw for the first game or so of the season. Honestly, the Preds on paper don't seem that bad, I guess, is my first blush. Obviously, a little on the older side. And, Stamkos, in my mind, is probably past his prime age. But O'Reilly's still very good. Forsberg's still very good. Evangelista's pretty decent. But you kind of notice something real quick. You've got Svechkov and Jost as your second-line pairing mates. And you're kind of like, yeah, this team does not have a lot of elite offensive depth. And that kind of is really the story of this franchise the last several years. Yes, you've got some individual amazing talents like Josie and a few others, but this team looks a lot more of like a counter and forechecking kind of squad. And in a lot of ways, it's very similar to what the Jets have. Now, there are some key differences. The first is some of their top line players are just well past their prime and not quite in the form that we've seen from Connor and Scheifele, right? KFC and Mark have been on a tear. This team less so. On defense, I'd say you have some similarities too. Shea's kind of like Neil Pionk, but for the Preds. Josie, is a one-to-one more for like Morrissey. Wilsby is kind of like your DeMello, although younger and a little bit more well-rounded and faster at the stage of his career. But like the bottom pairing, not too different from what the Jets have. So, there's more alike here. But I think in terms of like the team structure under Burnett, it's been a little bit more questionable, right? The Jets are very tight. They play a close style, whereas, the Preds have been not that organized. And I feel like offensively, there's just not a lot going on. So in my mind, this feels like a 3-1 win for Winnipeg. Saros has been pretty solid in net, and I think that's going to be a big, close sort of thing. But I think the Jets have a good opportunity to come home and walk out of here over the weekend with a 4-1 record. I don't think that this Preds team should be too hard to see off. Maybe I'm overstating this. The Habs did have to go through a pretty dramatic overtime to beat them, but I feel like Winnipeg is well coached enough. And, the Preds are generating so little at 5v5 to where I'm just not worried about this kind of opponent. They don't have a lot of team speed, and I don't think they're the kind of team that's built to match up very well against the Jets. Winnipeg kind of feasts on these more slower forechecking kind of teams. And, the Preds just aren't the way that they used to be, right? They used to be a defensive juggernaut, a really strong squad, deep from top to bottom. And now they're just kind of mediocre at best. And I think that's really the story of the franchise the last several years. And not much that Trotz has done has really changed my perception of that. So I'm predicting a 3-1 win. Drop your score predictions below or at the in the comments or at my social medias at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. In just a moment, I want to chat about next week and what we're kind of seeing for the Jets schedule. I think Winnipeg has, a very good opportunity to come away with some impressive wins, but we'll also see one of the stronger opponents that they face this season in Utah. So could be a very exciting week of Jets hockey. We'll chat about that coming right up. But before we do, wanted to let you know about our friends and partners at FanDuel. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel has an offer you don't want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. Pick a bet, put $5 down, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. FanDuel is always safe, secure, and easy to use. And if you're somebody who loves diving into player or team stats, this is the best way to reward your own knowledge. If you think you know who might be the league's MVP, or if you think you might even know who might win this week's upcoming matchups, no matter what, we just had a pretty chaotic game between the Steelers and Bengals. And if you had Joe Flacco leading the Bengals to victory, congrats, you just won yourself some pretty sweet cash. Whether you're a casual fan or diehard, though, you can make every Sunday watch along a lot more fun. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. Hey, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Everydayers, thank you so much for rejoining us in tonight's episode as we are continuing to chat a little bit about the Jets week ahead and what we can expect from what should be a pretty decent slate of games for the Jets to grab some points in. A lot of these opponents that they're facing are a little uneven, and sort of like the Jets maybe haven't had the best start on some of their 5v5 play. And this is where I think the Jets have some really nice matchup abilities and advantages compared to some of the teams that they're facing. When you have a guy like Connor Hellebuyck out there and Mark Scheifele and Morrissey leading the way against opponents like Calgary and Seattle, there's just a bit of a talent mismatch that might really favor the Jets. First up, of course, will be the Preds tomorrow night. And then on Monday, we have a road game to Calgary. Now, this is a later game, but that shouldn't be too much of an issue for Winnipeg. And yes, technically there is some travel. Again, probably not too much trouble here. The Flames are not very good. Even in preseason, we saw that. And Calgary has had real issues generating offense. The power play is not particularly dangerous. And with how the Jets have been, honestly, this feels like a game that the Jets should absolutely come away with 2 points in. I don't want to be overconfident about this stuff, and maybe I get made to look like a fool. I always add that disclaimer. But I just have a feeling, based on how Winnipeg's PK has been especially, that's become a real weapon now. The PK is legitimately dangerous enough to where I consider it a weapon kind of like the power play. I don't really find myself having ever said that before for the Jets, but Dean Chenoweth has this unit playing some incredible hockey. They've already had a shorthanded opportunity and I believe converted on it already. They've been creating some really good odd man rushes off the PK. The power kill that they've been using with Scheifele and Connor has been great. I just really like the aggression and pressure, and it feels like that's been a really big help, especially when the Jets traditionally don't have a good PK. We're used to seeing that unit really struggle. And so far, when you have a lot of limited talent at 5v5 to work with, especially against top-end teams, that special teams advantage can be such a godsend. So great work there. The power play looked pretty dangerous against the Flyers. I anticipate that will continue to be a big weapon for the Jets. And against a Calgary team that doesn't have a lot of speed and a lot of skill to work with, this feels like a game, again, that in theory the Jets should come away with a win in. Then you've got at home the Kraken on Thursday, so there's going to be a couple of days of rest. Calgary in transit to Seattle is not a crazy distance, not super close. But, from then on, they're not. I said they're going to Seattle. They're actually coming back home to Winnipeg. So my bad. They'll face the Kraken in Winnipeg, which should be, a solid opportunity for the Jets to come away with 2 points. The Kraken have played some pretty solid 5v5 hockey. They had a really close run affair against Anaheim the other night. I do think, the Jets should come away with a point. I don't think it's going to be super easy, though. I think the Kraken are going to play a fast, up-tempo style. I think it's going to be a very back-and-forth affair. I would think that, the rush chances the Jets have given up might be an issue in this game. We'll have to see. But I do think, the Kraken are going to be a little bit more of a formidable opponent than, say, at Calgary. Speaking of Calgary, the next night they're facing the Jets again. This time, of course, on Winnipeg soil. Because this is the second half of a back-to-back after what I do expect to be a tough game against the Kraken, I do wonder if this is where you maybe see the Jets drop a point or two. That said, though, like last year, I think the Jets had a pretty decent record after, the second halves of back-to-backs, if I recall correctly. They didn't drop every game. I thought they won a fair few. So, it's pretty early in the season. Even though you've had some serious injuries, maybe the Jets can find a way to rally and hold true. If you've got both Comrie and Hellebuck backing you up, pretty delightful goaltending duo to have, and they've both been performing at a pretty elite level to start the season. So, it's not inconceivable that out of those 3 games, you get 5 or 6 points already. The Utah one on Sunday, that's where things may take a little bit of a turn. The Mammoth are one of the few teams that I think can genuinely humble the Jets. They're a very tough opponent. The Utah squad has already had a little bit of a topsy-turvy start to the season, but if you look under the surface, at 5v5, they have really outplayed a lot of their opponents. Even if the record doesn't yet show it, thanks to some early injuries, this is a dangerous team, and I think this is going to be one of the toughest opponents Winnipeg plays this whole month. So I don't know what to expect out of that game. I'm going to say that's a loss. I do feel, even though it's on home ice, I think that's going to be a really tough game. If the Jets do come out with a big win, that'd be amazing. I think that'd be on par with beating the Dallas Stars this year. Dallas themselves, are pretty strong, one of the top teams in the Central. And I view Utah as a very shadow contender for one of the upper ranks of the Central Division. Maybe not top 3 or top 2 just yet, but they'll be a real pain in the butt and a team that has a style and specific approach that has given the Jets fits in the past. So we'll have to wait and see. But next week, I think I'm going to predict the Jets starting from tomorrow through next Sunday. I will say the Jets go 3-1-1. Give me your record predictions below for the Jets either in the comments or at my social medias at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's episode, though, that's going to be all the time that we have. I hope you've enjoyed listening, and we'll see you back here next week with some Jets coverage. Tomorrow night or Sunday, I'll probably have a brief little short about how the Jets did against Nashville, just in brief. And then on Monday, we'll have a deeper dive into the game and what went well or what didn't go well for the Jets against the Nashville Predators. But like I said, all the time that we've got tonight. Thanks for listening. Have a great night. And as always, go Jets go.